Welcome to Change My Relationship podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about forgiving the unforgivable. How do you take a very, very difficult, traumatic, and painful experience and work through forgiveness? Today, we have Rose Larson with us, and she's going to be just really vulnerable and honest about a very painful thing that happened in her life and how she worked through that. And I think you're going to grow to love her as much as I do. She's a great friend. So welcome, Rose.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So thank you for being willing to be so vulnerable and open. And I know your heart is the same as mine, and that is to help people with our experience, strength, and hope.
Absolutely. That's my life journey for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about your son's suicide. So I'm just going to let people know that from the top, unless, and just in case that's a really painful subject for them that they're not ready to listen to, how you worked through that and were able to forgive your husband, what would actually your ex-husband, maybe even your son, and yourself and any others that had anything to do with that. So if that's a real painful topic that you can't listen to, then maybe come back to this or just wait until you're ready. But let's go ahead. Tell me about John's childhood.
Well, John was just a pretty happy little boy, he was in Cub Scouts, he was in Little League, he was very active in school, um, and just very carefree, sweet little child. I never would anticipate he liked to protect his friends.
Right.
And he always was just real playful, teasing, just enjoyed life. He was a sweet kid. I do remember though, like even as a little boy, one time riding his bike, and something happened where he almost fell, and we were laughing as a family just because it was funny. And he got really offended. And I remember him stopping his bike and grabbing like a yucca plant and threatening to kill himself. It's
Oh,
just the weirdest, like, and we were like, well, no, we're not making fun of you. It was just, like you tripped and, oh, I'm sorry, honey. But I do remember him having this sensitivity. He
mhm,
definitely was sensitive as a child, though. And he didn't always take things the way they were presented.
mhm.
So he wasn't as lighthearted. Kind of was a little serious, especially when it came to, that kind of a thing. Like we were not laughing at him.
But he didn't have like depression or anxiety as a young
No,
child.
no, not at all. He was super playful and just really a sweet kid. And of course, my husband and I had a good relationship with him. We each had a lot of joy. He brought a lot of joy to our family.
Hmm. Okay. And then what about his teen years?
Well, as he began to become a teen, my husband and I were starting to have a bigger disconnect. And I think it's because my husband was not a believer.
Hmm.
And so when John was little, I started taking him to church, and we did church camps, and he was in Bible study, and we did a lot of church activities. And so I started joining women's Bible studies. So kind of like our paths started going different directions. And so my husband wasn't in sync with me. So there was a lot of, I guess we were living two different lives in a way, and just had moments that we were together, but it was very superficial.
Hmm.
And I think John started sensing there was a change, and he was very concerned about his father's salvation. And we were in prayer that his father would come to know the Lord. And I think his father, we became more successful in business, and he became more worldly, and he was heading more that direction, trying to, a lot of accomplishments, a lot of travel and, luxury type things. And, we were doing more of the church activities. And at one point, my husband wanted us to move to Mexico just
Hmm.
because he wanted to be in Mexico. And I mean, that would be such a culture shock I mean, John was not Mexican. I mean, he, I guess, physically was, but as far as his mind, he's American. And he didn't even speak Spanish. I mean, he was in Spanish class, but and he just like we both were like, no, we're not moving to Mexico. And he wanted me to change my citizenship. And so we were starting to have some arguments about that kind of stuff. And so my husband was really wanting a different life at that time, and John sensed it, and he knew. He's very sensitive. Like I guess that's what I saw as a little boy too. He could sense something wasn't going right in our marriage, and even though we tried to pretend everything was wonderful,
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Yeah. Kids can tell. They pick up on a lot, even little children, it's just
Yeah.
really young children. If you've heard my story, when I was 3, I stood up to protect my mom against my dad when he would get violent and he was drunk. And it's like, and when I was 2, I said to my mom, like, this isn't right. Daddy shouldn't yell at you. And it's like, where does that come from? It's just, we sense it. We know we sense emotions. Even babies sense emotions. But being a sensitive, probably a highly sensitive person, in by temperament, makes it even worse. So you talked a little bit about in your marriage that you were getting a little bit of a distance. So would you consider it to be like dysfunctional, or was it just that you were kind of um, had some disconnect between you?
It was definitely dysfunctional. I mean, when I was in it, I thought, oh, we're just trying to be like I always thought, oh, we're just gonna try to make dad happy, and then if dad's happy, we're happy. But we never addressed his anger issues. He had a lot of anger, and he was like he ruled the house,
Yeah.
and that was extremely dysfunctional. And I think John sensed that it wasn't fair, it wasn't balanced, and I became less and less with a voice, and he ruled the roost with a very hard hand. You had to get straight A's. There were all these you had to accomplish. And I think that John started seeing that this was not healthy, and his anger was so explosive. Like he would just overreact to things that were so small. And John became very sensitive about that, and very concerned. I remember one time I was really trying to get in shape, and I was going walking early in the morning with the girls. And I told John, get up in the morning, get your breakfast. I was teaching him how to get his own breakfast and get things going. And I'm going to be walking with the girls. And then when I get home, we'll get everything together in the car. And his dad, I guess, had just gotten back from town and didn't realize our system. And so he became extremely angry that I wasn't making breakfast. I wasn't taking care of the family. He wasn't in the loop.
Mm.
And when I came home, he got so angry, he almost pushed me down the stairs
Oh,
when I
wow.
was coming up to the door. And so we got into almost like a physical problem. And he was kind of like pushing me. And I think he thought I was interested in one of the neighbors or something. I don't know. It was really bizarre. And my son asked me on the way to school, Mom, are you going to have to divorce dad? So he knew that that was not appropriate.
Right.
It wasn't even correct.
Right.
But Phil had a lot of, maybe because he was having an affair. I didn't know it at the time, but projection. So
Yep.
when you're the one having the affair, you project it on others. I think he was thinking that way because of what he was doing, kind of.
Exactly. That's common, or it can be like I want to. It could even be manipulative. Like if I accuse her, then when she accuses me, I can just go, "No, it's you." Like, what are you talking about?
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's really more abuse than it was anger, because I mean that's obviously more than just an irritable, angry person. That sounds like abusive.
He definitely was abusive. And when that physical thing happened, I did go to counseling, and I ended up putting like the counselor helped me put a bigger boundary on him. And I told him that that ever happened again, that he would have to leave.
Mhm.
I wouldn't tolerate that. So then he started the silent scorn stuff. where
Oh,
he wouldn't talk to me for days. So he
abuse.
didn't react with physical, but he mentally would,
Yeah.
not talk to me or not talk to John if John didn't get a good grade on his,
Yeah.
score. He didn't approve of something with my older son, especially. He would just, he would yell and scream, not physically hurt us, but mentally. Yes, very abusive mentally.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is really hard on kids and really affects them. So, uh, when did the drug use start? Because I know that there was drug use.
Well, when John was about, 16, um, well, our marriage went south, as you already heard. And when I found out about the other woman, that was it for me. That was the deal breaker for me. Um, but we were at that point living in a big house, a lot of expenses. So we decided I would move in a different bedroom, and we would kind of be separated under the same roof kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so we were kind of separated, and John had become severely depressed through that. Um, he couldn't even get out of bed. And it was really scary to me. And his dad would take off. He'd be gone for, 2 weeks and he'd be gone. But I was really struggling with John's depression. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't get him out of bed. I wanted, he was at Orange Lutheran High and I was trying to get his assignments and I was doing all this stuff. And so I think what happened is it kind of came later. I got him into counseling. And then the doctor gave him a very low dose of antidepressant, and it actually helped.
Mhm.
And at that point, we were already at physically different homes. He did move. We used to own a ranch, so he moved to the ranch. And so at that point, John was doing better. He was functioning. He was actually, and I asked my mom to move in, so we have some semblance of family. And so he's actually doing better. But then once he found out that John was taking antidepressants, he got very angry and he just said, "We don't do that.
Oh,
We smoke pot. That's what we do." And he introduced our son to pot. So that's kind of how it started. And I didn't know it because he didn't tell me and I didn't know what was going on, but he threw away his antidepressants and then pretty soon he stopped going to counseling and his counselor called me and said, your son didn't come and I'm going to have to charge you anyway. But, and then I asked John, "Why aren't you going?" And then finally the truth came out that his dad had done that. And then I was like, oh no, now he's on pot. And so we're going to counseling. So it was kind of like this battle we were in of philosophies where my husband, told his son, "Your mom's crazy. She believes in that therapy stuff. You just need to get your act together. Don't listen to her. She doesn't have the right solution." And then I was over there, "No, you need counseling." So he was kind of in this terrible place of in between my husband and I. It was not good for him, you know. It's like I was in the church, I'm trying to follow God, I'm trying to do counseling, I'm trying to get help. And his dad is like, "No, we get our act together, we work hard, we get, good grades and we smoke pot." You know.
the one at the end does not seem to go together with all the other stuff. Yeah, work
Yeah.
hard, get good grades, do what you're supposed to do, but smoke pot. So, yeah, which pot, I mean, this is how many years ago?
He was about 16.
About
Yeah, so that
16.
was
So,
back, he would have been 40 this year. So
okay.
yeah. It was
So, wow, it's hard to believe.
2002 or 2001. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so pot was still pretty strong back then, stronger today, but I mean, that was still pretty strong pot, which has a pretty, you can be addicted to it and especially psychologically, but you can even, as pot got stronger, physical addiction was more and more common.
Yeah.
So now the addiction got pretty bad then, along with the depression, because I know you battled with this for how many years with between the
4 years. Yeah. 4 years I battled with him, you know, we're trying recovery, but he hadn't gotten into recovery yet. what had happened is his father was away, and we used to own a ranch. So he'd go to the ranch to visit his grandpa and hang out. It's kind of fun. Had
Mhm.
horses, and he met a bunch of his friends there from his Orange Lutheran High School. And didn't know those friends. They weren't his Little League friends or his church friends. They were new friends. And when they came home from the ranch and they were acting really strange, and I thought they were drunk. And I was like, oh my gosh, they've been drinking. And I didn't really know what to do. And I remember calling somebody and asking, and she goes, well, if they've been drinking, you need to confront them. And, so I did. And I realized it wasn't just alcohol. They had taken something that was hallucinogenic. And it turned out to be Jimson root,
Oh.
is a slang term. They call it hell's bells.
Mhm.
And it is actually poison.
Mhm.
Um, like if a cow eats it, it dies.
Yep.
That's how bad it is. And so they were all hallucinating and they couldn't talk. And it was just, so I called 911, and all four of the boys went to different hospitals, and John was in a coma for like 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
It wasn't even coherent. And I realized that he was in big trouble. And so I made a decision that he was going to need to go directly from the hospital to a program.
Uh,
And so his father came from Mexico and was furious with me. Like I somehow made this happen. And my brother kind of protected me from my ex at the hospital. But apparently, he told John that I was the problem, like, I always was the problem. And so he told John, we're going to kick your mom out of the house, and I'm going to bring my girlfriend in, and we're going to be a family, and she's just going to have to, do her own thing, and we're going to make this work. But John didn't really want that. But when I went in, I didn't know that conversation had happened. So when I went to talk to him, of course, I come with, well, we're going to do counseling and you need to get into a program. We need help. And he just looked at me and says, no, Mom, I'm going to do NA. I got to, don't worry, Mom, I'm going to get sober. I'll do my, and I just said, no, John, you almost died. This was really serious. You were in a coma for 2 weeks. You need more help. And I have a program, an adolescent program that'll be really good for you. It'll be good for our family. We'll be able to get some help. And then he turned on me, and I'll never forget it because it was right around Thanksgiving. And he just said, you know what, Mom? I'm going with my dad and we're kicking you out. And I was like, what? And he says, yeah, he talked to me. We're kicking you out of the house. So I'm not doing no program. And, you're going to be on the street. And it was so hurtful. I just was like flabbergasted. And I said, well, I love you enough to make you get help, and I'm not leaving the house. And that's going to be how it needs to happen, son, because we can't just go back like nothing happened. You need help. And so I left the hospital just like a train wreck. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is happening. And so right after that, his dad moved him onto the ranch with a mobile home. So now he has free reign on the ranch in a mobile home. And so he wouldn't talk to me after that. And I used to see him because the neighborhood we lived in, my house wasn't that far away from the ranch.
mhm.
It was in Chino Hills. And so he would sometimes drive out the driveway and I'd be driving out and we'd both be at the gate. And it was just the most horrible time. I don't think I talked to him again till Easter.
Mm.
He didn't talk to me. All that Christmas, all those months, he was just really angry, but his dad pretty much left him to himself, and the drugs got worse,
Yeah.
and he progressed into meth. And
Oh,
it was just so tragic and so horrible.
wow. Then that's guaranteed addiction because that's very, very, very addictive. And it messes with their brains.
Yeah.
So their brains are not the same. It does permanent damage and yeah, and then all kinds of other things. So that kept going. And then I know at some point he got back to your house for a little while because I
Yeah.
you had to make a decision to ask him to leave, right?
Well, I had asked him to leave really at the hospital.
Mm.
at that point. And then right after he was in the mobile home, he, at that point knew, I mean, it was clear because we had conversations that you can't live with me if you're going to be doing drugs. And so that was kind of the rule, and he knew that that was the rule. Um, so he just wasn't willing at that point, but then I did have a couple of moments. One really good moment was his dad. I went to ask if I could visit with him. And so his dad let me, and he was just in his room depressed. And when I went in there, he said, Mom, Dad's going to take me to Mexico because we had a business in Mexico, a fishing business. And I said, Oh, wow, that's a big change for you. I said, is that what you want to do? And he said, No, I don't want to do that. And I need you to do something. And so I said, okay, well, I'll have to talk to your dad about it and think about, but my rule, that you can't use drugs and be at my house. And he goes, yeah, I'm willing to get sober. So I talked to my counselor and they helped me how to, do it, how to talk to my ex. And I was so afraid to talk to him. But I showed up one day, I had the power of God, and I went in there and I said, You're not taking him to Mexico. He's a minor. I'm not going to allow you to take him to Mexico. And John's willing to get sober, and he's coming with me now. Grabbed his stuff. He got him in the car, drove him home, and he was like, Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Mom. And we got him back into counseling, and he started doing better for a little while again. And he had a job, and he was trying to go to school, but the addiction had gotten a hold of him at that point.
Yeah.
So that was, the back and forth. And so when I discovered he was using again, I had to put that boundary again. And so he took off and he went back to the ranch. And so I lost him again for a while. Yeah.
And then he had a suicide attempt that was unsuccessful. What happened with that?
He was at the ranch and it had gotten really bad. And so he, I guess, had punched the window or something and he had hurt himself. And so his dad called me to tell me that he kicked him out and to not let him stay with me. And I said, Well, where is he? He says, I don't know. So I just went into prayer. I was so panicky. And so he showed up at my house. And I said, Oh, you're here. And he says, Yeah, I'm here. And he says, Mom, just let me spend the night. Just let me spend the night. And, I'll get it together tomorrow. But I didn't know how bad it was at that point because he didn't come till the middle of the night. What had happened is he took off and then he for some reason, my pool equipment, God works in a mysterious way. I
Yeah.
went out to my pool equipment. I came back in. I always had the alarm on. And for whatever reason, I didn't lock that door. So he came in like 2 in the morning and the alarm went off. And so I'm like, oh no, someone's in the house. And I ran to where the alarm system is, and it's him. And he had all these like things in his hair, like leaves and stuff. And it was so bizarre. Anyway, he's trying to figure out the code. And I said, Oh, I got the code. Don't worry. I'll call the alarm company. You're here. I'm so glad you're safe. He goes, Mom, I just need to sleep. I promise in the morning I'll talk to you about getting sober. I'm done. But I didn't know he had an attempt at that point.
Oh.
I didn't know it. And so he went to bed. And in the morning, I woke him up and talked to the counselor about getting an emergency appointment and getting him into something. And so when he woke up, I heard the bathroom. So I went in there and he was washing his hands. And then I saw the blood running down his arms, his wrist. I was like, Oh my gosh, what'd you do? Oh my gosh, what'd you do? And he goes, I'm okay. I just needed to clean up. I'm good. Don't worry. I'm gonna get out of here. I go, No, you need help. And it was just this craziness. And so we had this nightmare where he ran away, took his car. I took my car, ran after. It's just this like
Yeah.
this speed chase. And then I called the police. The helicopters were around looking for him. I found his car, but not him. So then I had to get keys made for his car, get his car, put it in my garage, and I'm waiting for him, they're looking for him with the helicopter. And about 4 in the afternoon, he finally shows up. This has been going on since that morning.
Wow.
And when he shows up, he goes, okay, you got me. I'm ready to get some help. And then he told me this wild story that it was kind of cold. So it was like this, like maybe February, March, somewhere in there, but it was cold. And he had attempted to die. And he said, I was all ready. Dad kicked me out. I was in the Coyote Hill, which is kind of in the area where I lived. It was in the hills. And I took the knife and I cut myself. And I thought, good, I can finally be done with this. And he goes, I passed out. But Mom, I woke up and the coyotes were dragging me. And I jumped up and I realized I didn't want to die getting eaten.
Oh,
I
I've
don't know.
never heard that part.
He started running and he goes, and I realized you were just over the hill. So I ran over and I started checking all the doors, and that one door's open. And I said, well, how did you not bleed? He goes, well, I don't know. It clogged up. So I think the coldness,
Mm,
coagulated the cuts. And
yeah.
so, God spared his life. I mean, unbelievable story. And so at that point, I said, okay, well, I have to tell your dad that you're okay because he's very concerned. And he goes, I hate him. I hate him. And anyway, so I called his dad. Of course, his dad rushes over. So we're all sitting in our patio waiting for the 5150, right? They're going to come.
Hmm.
And so we're waiting for that and we're talking. And so, his dad says, why'd you do this? Why'd you do this? And so then John just said, well, don't worry, I'm going to get some help. And I'm saying, yes, honey, that's what we need. We need help. That's what we've always needed. And his dad was just so angry. He just looked at him and said, you don't even know how to do that right. You can't even kill yourself right. What you're supposed to do is use a gun and you're supposed to blow your brains out. Don't you know? That's how you kill yourself. And I went into just,
Oh,
what kind of father are you? And I'm screaming and I'm crying hysterically. It was the scene. And then John just said, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because of both of you. It's all your fault. It's both of your faults. And boy, did I feel so much shame, so much despair, just so horrible. And then they came and got him, and he went into a program and he had a bout of sobriety. He started his journey and trying to get well. But I honestly think there was something more to it. And there's now today, because I work as a peer support specialist at a wellness center, so I work with mental illness. And one of the things that they're starting to realize is that people that use meth can actually have schizophrenia induced
it's
drug.
it's it's a it's a drug-induced psychosis from
Yeah,
meth to where they
yeah,
is that what you mean? That they're
yeah, because
actually
he was
psychotic?
hearing
Yes,
voices.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. That
And,
is very common with meth.
mhm. And so those voices were plaguing him. And even though he was sober, nobody knew what to do about the voices. We didn't, that was a long time ago.
Hmm.
Is almost 20 years ago. And so they were just trying to give him 12-step AA when he needed more than that.
Yes, absolutely. He needed medication.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then how did the second suicide attempt come about?
Well, it was about a year later, and he had been working a program. He actually was getting better, and then he had a relapse. I think his dad gave him pot brownies one time, and he tested dirty. And so then his dad gets him an apartment, and then he used to throw money at him, and it just was so destructive. And Bill and I were trying hard to help him. That's my husband I met during that interim from church, and we were really praying about, should we bring him back in if he's trying to get sober? We were praying about what to do about it. And then he called Bill and I, and he said, I'm ready to do program again. So he got into a sober house, and he was actually had a job. He was in sober living. He was actually telling his story in a panel, and he was actually doing pretty good. except the depression was still there. He was still depressed. And I think he needed that extra help that we just didn't know about that he needed. And so that second time, he, I thought, this is an answer to prayer. This is a miracle. He's going to, be the example of God working in his life. And I had talked to him like the Thursday before he actually committed suicide, and he was angry with his dad. He
Mm.
had an argument with his dad, and I don't even know why. It was something about his dad calling his house manager, and he was just so angry. And John was saying, "I'm sick of it. He trying to cause me trouble, and I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do." And he was just worked up. And so I spent about an hour talking to him. And I said, "Honey, well, maybe your dad's a little toxic for you. Maybe you just need to take a little break right now. I mean, we can still pray for your dad, but he's not good for you right now. And I want to go to school and I can't afford it." I said, "Bill and I will help you. But,
Mm.
why don't you start with like one art class?" Because he was an artist,
Mhm.
and just get your feet wet. Just get going with one class. We'll help you. And Bill and I have been talking about maybe bringing him back in the home. It was just in that weird area. And that Thursday night, I talked to him for like an hour and a half, maybe an hour, probably an hour and a half. And by the end of the conversation, we prayed together. He sounded more calm. He sounded more hopeful. He was excited about maybe trying school again, and that he knew we were going to help him. And we hung up. "I love you. I love you." And then Saturday, um, or no, Friday night, he went to go see my brother, and he was with some old friends, and they had come to my brother's house, and my brother didn't let him stay, and he let him go. And apparently, his friends had been using something, but John seemed sober. My brother said it was maybe he drank, but he didn't seem like on anything. And he told my brother, "Are we okay? Are we cool? Are we cool?" And he said, "Yeah, we're cool. I just can't let you stay here." And so he left. So my brother called me Saturday and said, "Have you seen John? Have you heard from him?" I said, "Well, he's working today." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, he stopped by last night." I said, "He did?" And so we didn't know where he was exactly, but I knew he was supposed to be at work. So I started calling him, "Just call me after you get off work." But I had a bad feeling. I really did. But I just kept praying. And his brother, my older son, was very active in church and had found the Lord and was very involved with Bible study. He was heading to the beach. So he had passed by the branch, and he said it was like the Holy Spirit or like this voice telling him, "Go to the ranch. Your brother needs help." And he didn't go because he was late, because he knew John was supposed to be working. And he knew John wasn't at the ranch, or we thought.
Yeah.
But it turned out that after my brother rejected him, he and his friends went to the ranch, and he broke in. We had two houses on the ranch, and he broke in his grandpa's place, the bottom place, and his friends and him stayed there. And in the morning, his friends asked him, "Hey, John, you want to ride? I know you have to work." He goes, "No, man, I'm just going to stay here. I'm just going to wait for my grandpa and my dad. They're coming home." And they said, "Okay, you sure?" And they go, "Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. Weren't you going to work?" "No, I called in. I'm just going to wait here." And then I guess we had a horse that needed attention. A vet came. So the vet had knocked on the door about noon, and John answered and said, "Oh, they're not home. You'll have to come back Monday. Don't come back because I'm leaving. I'm going to work." So he told the vet he wouldn't be there. And then he left. And so we know he did it sometime Saturday afternoon.
Mm.
And then his grandpa was out of town, and his grandpa came home Sunday and found him.
Oh.
And that's when he called me. And it was Sunday afternoon, and we were driving. And I just remember answering the phone and being surprised that my ex-father-in-law was calling me, because, we didn't talk since the divorce. And he just said, "Rose, John's here." And I said, "Oh, okay. I was looking for him." He goes, "Well, he's dead." And I was, what? And I dropped the phone and I just started crying hysterically. And then Bill got a hold of the phone and I just was just, just distraught. And so we went to the ranch after that. And that was how we found him there. And my husband wouldn't let me go see John. I wanted to. I desperately wanted to go see him. And my husband said, you know what, honey, I don't think you should. You know, he's with the Lord. I don't think that should be your memory. And I just kept bringing it up. Well, I think I need to go see him. I think I know. And he just wouldn't let me. And we just started praying.
Yeah.
And Romans 8:28 came. That's my life verse. And it was just, I don't understand it, God. I don't know how this could work for good, but I'm going to trust you with my son. And it was just so painful. It was just so terrible. And Bill and I had only been married about 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my mom, didn't approve of our marriage because she felt like I needed to get John and I in an apartment and get him out of sober living and not marry and take and fix my son because she's codependent too.
Yeah.
So she just felt like that was I was a good mom. That's what I would do.
Right.
And I told her, no, mom, that isn't the answer, but we kind of had a little problem with each other because of that. And
Yeah.
so it was just Bill and I, and then we were just in prayer. And then when they took his body, I just was able to lay my hands on him and just pray a mother's prayer for him and for us. And then they took him.
Mm-hmm.
And then shortly after, his dad came and his girlfriend, the one that he had left me for. And they drove up after that. And I don't know, do you want me to tell you what happened?
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
We've spent a lot of time going into the
yeah.
story.
Well,
Um,
this is the
but
part of
this
the
is the
story.
place where we're going to pivot to start talking about forgiveness because
Yes.
he shot himself with a gun this
Yes, he
time.
did exactly. He was in I think it was a resentment with his dad
Hmm.
that he was going to show him,
Yep,
which
that he
is
could
sick.
do it.
It's very sick thinking, right? It's
Oh,
not,
absolutely.
but he was so depressed and he was tormented by these voices. And I think it was just too much. He just couldn't take
Well,
it.
and when there's when your dad is critical of you and has been abusive, there's just a deep heart desire to be approved of by your dad and to have your dad show he loves you and isn't rejecting you and isn't doing all those things. So, when it keeps going, especially in boys, there's tremendous anger. And, it could be anger, it could be desperation, it could be feeling like, yeah, maybe I'm not good enough and I couldn't do it right the first time, but I'll show him. We don't know, but there's all kinds of possibilities. But, you know, tell us what happened when your
Yeah.
ex-husband and the woman he had the affair with came in.
Yeah, so they drove up, and she's quite a bit younger. She was only like 5 years older than John. She was in her early 20s, and I was in my 40s at that point, and I think Phil was 50. So she's a young woman,
Hmm.
and she's from Mexico. She's Latin. We used to have a fishing business, so he met her over there, and it was really hard for me because it was kind of like my thinking was she's the one that broke up our marriage, like the
Yeah.
blame stuff you do when you find out about an affair. And even though I had been praying to forgive her, to forgive my husband, I definitely was asking God to help me to let go of all that. But it's still like when I saw her, it was like, oh, there she is. And so my ex-husband, John's dad, was trying to keep her away from me. He was like corralling her to go in the house or something. And I looked at Phil and I said, you don't have to do that. That's the person you're with. It's okay. And he goes, are you sure, Rose? You sure? And I said, yeah, it's okay. So then she comes towards me and I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's not okay. But I thought of my hero of faith, Corrie ten Boom, and her story of when she saw the man that killed her sister in the concentration camp. and how she saw him at a when she had a speaking event, and how she all that anger, all that rage came up, and she hated this man that did this to her sister. And so she asked God, only God could help her to shake his hand and forgive him. It
Mhm.
had to come from God. And so I grabbed a hold of that thought, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, Lord, let me be like Corey. Let me just at least shake her hand and wish her well, to be kind, that she's not the enemy, that. And so I prayed for that. And so she came towards me, and I'm like trying to shake her hand, but she's Latin, like, she's like all over me, and she just like sobbing and hysterically crying, and I'm just like patting her back, and I'm like, it's a, I'm comforting her. I was like, and I was like, it was like a weird like moment, like, oh my gosh, I feel this empathy for her pain, and yet it's my son that died, and her, I'm comforting her, and I looked over my shoulder, and over her shoulder, as we're in this embrace, and I see my husband sitting with Phil, John's dad, comforting him, and he's crying and saying it's my fault. I should, he was distraught,
Yeah.
and Bill is telling him, Jesus loves you. You can have John's Bible. Here's John's Bible. And I could see glimpses of God working with Bill, my husband, talking to John's dad and comforting him, and me comforting, this woman. And it was like only God can do that.
Yeah.
There's no way. And not only that, my mom, when she arrived, we hadn't been talking because she was so angry that I didn't do what she wanted me to do. And there was this, moment when they took his body that I fell on my knees and I was just sobbing. And she felt compassion for me and came over. And so, there was just all this reconciliation going on by the power of the Holy Spirit, by God just lavishly pouring out love to us in the midst of this horrible pain. And there was no bad words to one another,
No anger,
no
no
anger,
blaming.
no blaming, comforting. It was almost impossible. It is impossible. Without God, that is impossible.
And what about later, like when you left and you were out of the shock? Did you have other moments where the anger would come up and you would think, the grief process where you're thinking, well, if only this, if only his dad had been nicer, or if his dad hadn't, you know, said something, or if he hadn't had this problem with my brother? I mean, did you do that? And did that bring up like unforgiveness, or did you literally not go through that in terms of blaming people?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that question, because the fleshly side of me really struggled with it,
Hmm.
um, because I just felt like if he could have just done things a little bit different, you know, maybe John would still be here. But it's kind of like what happened after that is more that I turned the anger against me.
Mm.
It was more towards myself. Like, because when he left me for the younger woman, I went through, um, I come from a family of alcoholism, right? And so I started using wine as a way to cope. Now, because I'm a Christian woman, it didn't go too far down. I caught it to where it was early. Like, I didn't get in trouble with the law, or, I
Yeah.
didn't do anything, but I did have a moment of clarity where I realized I was having a problem with alcohol. And God clearly told me, because at John's 16th birthday, before he got into problems, I ruined his birthday by drinking too much that birthday. And it was because we were separated and we're having this family thing, and what a farce. And I just like gave into it, and I wasn't proud of that moment, but it got me into recovery. It was the very thing that God used to bring me into recovery. So what happened for me when John died was, you didn't set the example. You didn't get it right. You weren't the perfect mom. You should have never done that. maybe he'd be alive if you would have done it better. It was this, I totally lashed on myself. And when I saw his body, that was a very dark moment because, they prepare it. And, his father was Catholic in his, religious background. And so was I, but I've been a believer for a long time. But he wanted a Catholic, funeral. And we also had a celebration of life at the church because John was a big part of our church. But his father wanted, so at Forest Lawn, we had that, the Catholic thing. And so they were preparing his body. So I went with my brother and with my husband, my husband I was married to, Bill, from church. And when I saw him, all of that shame, the enemy was attacking me and saying, you weren't the right kind of mother. You screwed up. You didn't do it right. You drank on his birthday. No wonder he did it because of you, because you didn't stand up to his dad. You should have gotten, done something different than let him be abusive. You let it happen. It's all your fault. So I turned it really on myself. And at that moment, when I was just in utter despair, I was just in this terrible spot. I heard just very slight, it was so tiny, but it was this little Holy Spirit voice that said, that's a lie. You were team mom. You were room mom. You were there for the camp counselor. You prayed with John. You prayed for his older brother to receive Christ. You prayed for his dad to find the Lord. You took him to church. You read Bible devotions with him, and reminding me of every wonderful thing. You were the chaperone for jazz band. You did so many things with him. And all the things, the memories came back, flooding back, and it totally washed out that shame. And then I just poured out this mother's prayer, and it freed me from that loathing I had for myself. And it made me realize that, God's mercy and grace was there for me, and that he loved me, and that I had to see the good that was there. It wasn't all bad. There was a lot of good. And what it did is it gave me a perspective of, my ex-husband was an angry man,
Yes.
but he was also a good provider. It
Hmm.
was like God showed me the good in me, and he showed me the good that there was in that marriage. And being that he was such a good provider, I didn't work for 17 years. I was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And so it was like I wouldn't have all these memories and I wouldn't have done all those things if he hadn't have been a good provider.
True.
And so that was like God showing me that, that I could trust him for that moment and be grateful for the good that was brought to me through that. And so after John, my husband and I hadn't really spoken at all. We were in a terrible property battle, so we didn't talk at all
Yeah.
after the divorce. And so we went to the mortuary to plan his placard, his his plaque, and so we designed it just for him. His favorite scripture was John 3:16. We put that on there. We put music notes, some of the just designed it. His name means John. John means what is it? Friend of God, something like that. We put that on there, and so after we designed it, it was only him and I. First time we're alone together, and so we're walking out, and he says, "Well, I guess there's nothing more to say." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, I have something I want to say to you." And he was like, "Oh, here it comes. She's gonna blast me." I just knew he was like bracing himself. And I said, "I want to tell you that I am so grateful you were a good provider because Phil, nobody can take away the 17 years of amazing memories I have with him. And it's because of you. You helped that happen for me. And I'm grateful that I have that richness. And it's all because of you. And so I want to thank you for that." And he just like almost stumbled to his car. He didn't know what to do with that. But it's because when God gives us his eyes to see things,
Mm.
we can see it from a distance and we can
Mhm.
see it from a different view.
Yeah.
And the one thing that did come to me is that unfortunately, he's going to have to remember his parting words with his son.
Yes.
He's going to have to
A lot to live
remember the
with.
argument
Yep.
and telling his son that he didn't do it right and he should have used a gun. And not only that, he didn't get rid of the gun. The gun was there,
Right.
and I was always hounding on him to get rid of the guns. And he didn't think he needed to. And that's got to be a hard thing to live with. And I
Hmm.
have a lot of compassion for him because I can't even imagine. And I'm so grateful for God showing me my own ugliness, helping me realize I needed recovery, and then setting me on the right path of a new way of living. And now my parting words with my son were recovery oriented, loving him where he was at. There was times one time he showed up and he had been drinking. And as long as he wasn't actively drinking, we let him in and we talked to him. And I remember we had this conversation about the steps and, how he's powerless and, and so I have memories of affirmations of trying to encourage him, nothing, no anger,
Right.
no yelling at him. How could you show up my house drunk? Instead it's like, okay, come on in, we'll feed you, you know.
Yeah, wonderful. That's really good. And I mean, you could have gone through a lot of blame, like, why didn't I let him live with me? Did you do that? Did you question, second guess that? Because I know I would have.
Yeah, I
You
did.
know the reasons.
Why didn't I do it sooner?
No, I know the reasons that you didn't have him there, and they were because you had boundaries. You couldn't have him be using at your home. And yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I remember talking to you about that at that
Yeah,
time. And I think we went to the same meeting in recovery at that
yeah,
time
we did.
in Al-Anon, right? And
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with you, and you were saying, I can't have him there. I think he'd been even gotten angry in your home and
Hmm.
done some like damage or something. And but the fear of suicide is what keeps a lot of people, especially if there's been a prior suicide attempt, from putting a child out of their home. But you knew recovery, you knew what it took, and you knew you couldn't. And
God gave me a really interesting for affirmation that I was doing the right thing. And I do remember talking to you about it. And but I still like my bleeding heart.
yeah,
But I had met a friend in recovery that son was actively addicted in his home. He was separated. He was divorced from his wife, but the mother was letting the son live there, and he was in his room all the time, and he was just kind of like John, depressed and big gaming or whatever. And so he was just distraught over it. And I told him what I was going to do. And he agreed with me. And he said, yeah, I don't know how to get my wife to, she needs, I meant my ex-wife to get, she won't do a boundary and So finally, he got his ex-wife to convinced that his son needed help. And then he was able to talk his son into getting help. And so they made arrangements, and he was a lawyer. So he had plenty of money. He paid for a program, a really good one. And he was going to pick up his son. And he had met with his son and he shared it at this recovery group I was with. And he said, yeah, I shared with my son. And, he said he can't do it, but I told him he could. And I'm picking him up after the meeting and I'm going to take him in. I'm so excited. Well, the next day he came in and his son had died that night. And it's because he OD'd on whatever it was he was Ambien. He was getting Ambien through the mail, and his ex-wife didn't know. The mother didn't know. And so that night when his dad left, he overdosed on it. So he didn't really want to do it. And so what it showed me is that can I live with my son dying in my house? Can I do anything?
yeah,
Can I live with him not being in my house and I didn't do anything? I mean, with God, you can live through anything,
mhm,
but I don't want to be enabling a behavior by just acting like nothing's happening.
Right.
That was what made me decide I had to have the boundary. But it was not like my feelings were not connected to my head,
Very
knowing what
hard.
was right.
Very hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because and it is normal to be fearful. Were you angry with your son? Because the grief process includes anger, and usually with suicide, the hard problem is because you're grieving the death, but the person who's gone took their life. So there is some blame often and some anger as far as like, why did you do that?
You know, I've never had, it's interesting. I cannot dream of my son past a certain age. He's
Hmm,
always a little boy. And
really?
maybe I'm not healed from that yet. It might be still something that's a stronghold for me. I
Uh-huh.
just cannot get, I still see him like a little boy.
Yeah,
And when I dream about him, he's always a little boy.
yeah.
And I kind of feel like there's a barrier there, like I can't go there. Um, I've grieved the losses, like they call it secondary losses, like I'll never see him marry, I'll
Yeah.
never know what he could have been,
Yeah.
all of that. But I haven't been able to be angry with him. And I don't know if that's something I still need to work on. It's like
Or if by
we're done
God's
working on
grace,
stuff.
or if by God's grace, with between all your recovery and the gratitude that you had through that, if maybe you don't have to go through that. But I know people do, and it's hard. That's one of the hard things with suicide, but that's wonderful. So now the other part of your story is John's brother, who was deeply affected by his brother's suicide. Can you talk about his brother?
Yeah, his brother really felt responsible. If he had just listened to that voice and gone to the ranch and
Uh,
not gone to the beach party Bible study thing that he was late to, maybe he would have saved his brother's life.
yeah,
And he just couldn't accept that it's kind of like maybe it's survival, guilt kind of thing or
survivor's
something.
guilt.
Yeah, survivor's guilt, like, because if John was bent on that mode, he would have probably done it anyway, right? If it wasn't that day, it would have been a
Or he
different.
might have already been gone.
He could have been gone already. Yeah. So it's well, no, because he was headed on the road at 11, so that's how he
Oh,
knew he
okay.
wasn't gone, and
Okay.
that's where the guilt. Like I should have gone. The vet came at noon. He could have taken him to the
Oh,
beach.
wow.
It would have worked out.
Wow, that is heavy to carry.
Yeah. So it's just something he hasn't been able to face. And so unfortunately, it began his spiral. And so he relapsed. It was subtle. It started with alcohol, you
Hmm.
know, and then it progressed, and he was having marriage problems. And he ended up, just it's been 20 years. He's been some bouts of sobriety, in and out of jail, all drug related.
Wow.
And I just don't know if he'll ever find his way out of that. I'm praying for it. I'm asking for the miracle, but it just seems like, it's a stronghold of shame. And
Hmm.
that's, I think, one of the big things that the enemy uses to hold us hostage.
Right.
If he can get us to believe that we're no good and that God can't forgive us, it's
Yeah.
like reverse pride in a way,
Yeah.
then we become prisoners to that dungeon. I call it a dungeon. You go to
Yep.
that dark dungeon and you feel like God, there's no hope.
And then if he's in, yeah, he's in so much pain over that, and he's numbing the pain with substances, he's not healthily grieving the pain, which is what allows us to go through something so incredibly difficult. But he's not doing it. He's avoiding it because it's too painful.
Yeah,
That's
and
so
the
sad.
worst part about it too is that his sister committed suicide about 3 years ago, his half sister.
Wow.
And
Oh,
so it's built, there's more going on, with family dynamics.
yes.
Being that his biological father, um, is has police, he was in the police. He very ashamed of his son, I think. I think he loves his son, but I think he's also ashamed of him because he's not the law-abiding citizen right now. And
Right.
so he's never visited his son in jail. He doesn't want, any of that. And then his sister, his oldest sister, from that second marriage his biological father had, she became very sick herself with depression.
Mm.
But David was involved in that. He was the last one to see her, and he rescued her from her attempt. She was in the garage with the fumes,
Right.
the
Carbon
I don't think she
monoxide.
knew how to do it exactly, but she
Yeah.
she had the car running, and he caught her, and she had a suicide note. But because, he was in his addiction, she asked him, and I think they probably used together,
Mm.
and that she was kidding, and then he decided to leave because it wouldn't be good for her to be hanging out with him because the father was abusive. Her husband was abusive, and he had taken the kids away from her because he has a lot of money because she had, done drugs. And so anyway, she was a mess. And that night after he left, she hung herself.
Oh, no.
So he has to live with that. And of course, his dad and his stepmom blame him, because he was the last one to see her. And so he's got a lot to get over, like to
Yes, that
recover
is
from.
very hard. Yeah. So, and sometimes people can't get over that. And that's just huge. But if they don't have the Lord and they don't have help, that's just so much pain. So how do you find, I know what the answer is, but I want people listening to know, how do you find serenity to deal with your son potentially doing this same thing that his brother did or dying of an overdose and being on drugs and being in jail and out of jail, and I'm sure he's been homeless at times, and I mean, how do you handle that?
You know, I have really tried hard because I'm very codependent, to fix him in so many different ways.
Okay.
And I want a solution. But I want an outcome. Like, I want more than like the right, I want him to get sober and,
Of course.
but what I've noticed about myself, and God's revealed this to me in the last couple of years, because, this in and out of jail and all this stuff, I jump in the hole with him. And then I began to try to push him out. And I do it by, oh, go to school. Oh, last time, I mean, I was taking him to work. He was working in Huntington Beach.
Oh, that's a good drive. That's at least a half hour without traffic. It could be an hour plus with traffic.
I became his taxi cab driver. I was taking him to PO. I was taking him to the work so he wouldn't lose his job and he'd be okay. And so there I am in the hole, trying
Hmm.
to push. If I could just get him out of the hole, he'll start running and he'll be great.
Right.
Well, I'm in the hole. That's the part I didn't realize, that I'm
Right.
in the hole. I'm not giving him a hand up. I'm in the hole with him.
Sure.
And so it was not good. I wasn't emotionally available to my husband, to my other family members, his children. I'm a blended family, right? I have grandchildren from his daughter
And your son has
and my
children, so you were
yeah.
very active in grandparenting them.
Yes. And so recently, God showed me that I jump in these holes and I try to, because I don't want that outcome. So
Mhm.
I'm going to put all my energy into making sure that I do everything possible to fix this. Well, I get very sick. and I lose perspective. And so, what recently happened is I had a dream. And I think God uses dreams sometimes. And the dream was that we were all running a race. And I'm running and we're all running. And I see my son under this tree. And it's shady and it's nice and grassy. And he's kind of off, on the side of the road. And I said, oh, I got to go get him. So I run over to the tree and I said, come on, we got to go. We're all running. We got to go up that hill. And he's like, no, I'm good. I'm hanging out here on this tree. But no, and I'm trying to drag him. And, he's quite a bit heavier than me. Trying to drag him out of there. And he's, Mom, I'm not going. I'm fine. And this voice from heaven says to me, leave him to me and go and run your race.
Wow.
And I looked at him and I was crying. And I said, I wish you would join us. He said, no, I'm comfortable. And I said, all right. And I just was so sad. And I turned around, I started running, and then I woke up.
That is a very, very specific dream.
It
I
was.
think the Lord gives us dreams too.
So this last time that he got out of jail, he asked for my help again. And I don't mind helping him like get somewhere or whatever.
No.
But I thought I don't know if this is the Lord that did this, or I don't know why it happened this way. But usually they release them like at 8 in the morning. And so that was our deal, that I was going to go over there at 8 in the morning and take him over to his PO to see where he was going to, live. And when I went over there, he wasn't there. And so then I went to my nephew's graduation, and I thought, well, I don't know. He must have went with his friends. I don't know what happened to him. So then at about 2, or about 11:30, 12, one, maybe about 2, we were going to lunch after the graduation, and I was taking my mom somewhere. And the thought came to me, maybe you should go back to that Carl's Jr. and see if he's there. But I decided not to.
Mm.
And I don't know why I thought that or why I felt that, but I thought, I'm not going to put my mom through that.
Mm-hmm.
Go over there, see if he's there, look for him. Turned out he was there. They released him later, and he was waiting for me.
Okay.
And so then I guess he realized I wasn't coming, and he couldn't call me because he didn't have a phone. So
Mm-hmm.
he took the bus and went to the PO, and I guess they put him in a house, and so I didn't hear from him for several days. When I finally heard from him and I went to go see him, I met with him. He was right back into his addiction.
Wow. So
So
fast.
we had a taco, and I dropped him off at his PO's, and I think I dropped him off at his, where he said he'd walk home where he lives. I don't know if he really went where he lived or whatever. And so what God has given me is I have this mantra,
Right.
and I say, I trust you, Jesus. And then it helps me align my eyes to Jesus rather than, oh my gosh, what if this and what if that? And oh no, he's not here. He's gone. He's, a lot of times impending, like I'm ready to, he's dead. He's,
Right.
I got to plan a funeral. And I don't let myself go there, because today that
Right.
isn't what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I can pray for him. And so I keep saying, I trust you, Jesus.
Yeah.
So he called me recently because I haven't seen him very much. And we'll see. He says he's going to meet me at church Sunday.
Okay. Yeah.
So
You just have to be open to it, but not be completely invested in it, because you can never tell. I know with a family member that I deal with that has been in with addiction, mental illness, suicide attempts. I know for me, for years, I lived with every day, what do I need to do today to where if something bad happens, I will know that I did the best I could and I did the right thing. And so I would weigh the same thing, enabling versus tough love. and it helps you not to be angry. It helps you not to say words that you would regret, even though you're in the midst of this incredibly frustrating situation and you have anger and you want to shake them and tell them, what to do. And but it helped me, still helps me when I need to use it, is to know that uh, I want to know, I don't want to have those regrets and be beating myself up, like you said. I want
Yeah,
to feel good about what I've said and what I've done. And that often means not enabling, saying no
exactly.
in very hard times. I remember saying for 4 years, like you have to go into, or no, it actually wasn't 4 years, from I think it was about 8 months, where it's like, you have to go into recovery, but I won't help you at all unless you go to recovery. And like, I can't, the anxiety was so high. And I was just like, but you will,
Yeah,
you want my help. And I just had to hold on to that. And then it actually happened. Right. And
yeah,
so it's
well,
just, you just gotta,
yeah,
but we need help. That's
we
where
need help.
12-step program recovery comes in when you're dealing with addiction, alcoholism. Al-Anon is a wonderful help. And counseling, we both utilized counselors, Al-Anon, Celebrate Recovery is wonderful too. I know you're involved with that now. And just friends and support and lots of phone calls. So it is doable, but it's hard. So in closing, what would you like to say to the person who is listening or watching and is dealing either with a loved one who has tried to commit suicide and they're fearful, or they're in this spiral of drugs and all this, and they're struggling with pain or fear or unforgiveness? What would you say?
Mm. I would say that this is a really tough journey, you know, but it's something that you're not meant to do alone.
Hmm.
And I highly recommend that you not be alone in it. And that's why the support groups are so powerful, And if you're here on this podcast, you obviously been introduced to Carla and her studies. They're very powerful. They will help you, and you do it in a group setting. So you meet other people, and God uses people. He
Yes.
really does. He uses people, and we can't be lone rangers. And it's very easy to isolate and feel like you can't tell people, and maybe you can't. I mean, there might be some people that maybe you shouldn't, but
Yeah.
there are people that are like you, that are struggling, that understand what
Hmm.
you're going through. And it's so wonderful to have, people that can kind of like Moses. Remember when his hands got weary and
Yeah.
then they were lifting his hands, and as
Yep.
long as his hands were lifted, he could win the battle.
Right.
And that's kind of what's happened to me when I'm in those really tough moments
Yeah.
where I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I was going to mention that my son called me last, I guess it was right after Thanksgiving or right before Thanksgiving. And he told me that I had to give him $3,000, and this girl had a charge card and I could charge on her. I mean, it's a wild story he's telling me. And I listened to him, and then he paused, and I said, "Well, I can't do that." I put my boundary.
Yeah.
Then he tells me, "Well, okay, I'm saying goodbye to you because I'm being kidnapped, and if I don't give him this money, I'm going to be killed. So this is the last time you'll hear from me. Please tell my daughter I love her."
Oh, wow.
And I got to deal with that. And the temptation of, is my son's worth $3,000? Should I conjure up this money? But then where does it stop? Am I going to be
Yeah.
called all the time to give money? What do I do? But I knew what to do. God told me, run your race, leave
Yeah.
him to me.
Yeah.
So I told him, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And he goes, well, there's nothing to say. And there was this silence. And I said, I have something to say. And he says, what's that? I said, I love you. I love you so much, David, and God loves you, and I'll pray for you. And I'm
Oh,
sorry you're in this terrible situation. So I had to go to Boston to be with Bill's family and act like I'm normal. And I'm
oh
just saying, I
no.
trust you, Jesus. I can't tell them what's going on, but I'm just waiting for the phone call that he's dead because,
Oh,
he was captured. he's being held prisoner, and maybe it's the guy that he owed drugs to. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
And then I come back and I get this phone call from him, and he's just like he forgot he said that to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what about being captured? I thought you were captured. Because, oh, I got away. And so, sometimes our kids are manipulative,
Oh, heck yeah.
and we
You
have to just
know,
be,
drug addicts are really good at lying and making up stuff to get what they want. They're fantastic with manipulating. He was using fear. But the problem is you can't give him that money, because if you do, then that might be the money that he uses to go buy the drugs that he overdoses on. And then you will have that to to deal with forever. So we have to be good to ourselves. I look at that as I'm powerless over that, but we don't leave our kids and abandon them. Like, we care about them. Like, he comes over, you have him for dinner. Like, I'm involved in this person's life, and intricately, and we do the things we do. What I always say, what encourages them, and we can do, but anything that discourages them, we don't do. Then we might do something because we know it could be too overwhelming, but we don't do things that enable,
yes.
that harms them.
And what
Romans,
helps me too is that I say, what if I wasn't on this earth? Would God still help my son? And would he still woo
yeah,
him and draw him to himself? He would.
yes.
So I have to remember I'm not the savior.
Well, and God is doing that. The Holy Spirit, that's his job, is to draw men toward the Lord. And the Holy Spirit is doing that. Now, people get to decide if they're going to listen or not. And if they don't listen, that we can't, we're not their Holy Spirit. If we can't, I know there's so many scriptures I use in my devotional and a lot of my posts that I do, that, it's like there's a scripture in Proverbs, and it talks about the lazy man won't even lift a spoon to their mouth to eat. And then
Yeah.
I add on to it, oh, but we lift it for them while we're enabling. We're like,
Get your
eat,
hand up there.
here's the bowl. We not only cook the food and buy it, but we put the bowl there and we feed it to them. And then you can rub the throat, like of a dog, to get them to swallow. We're rubbing their throat, swallow, 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 all the while our life is falling apart. I mean, yeah, we have to be willing to let go and take care of ourselves, and do the right thing. And with God's help and the help of program principals and support from others, we can do it. And we can still, like, you live a fully normal life. I live a fully normal life. Like, we can laugh, we have joy, we take care of our other relationships. But if you don't have that, you can become so consumed by this one person that you are gripped with fear, and all you're doing is trying to rescue this person, or you allow that person into your house, and it destroys your own home, your own life, your marriage, relationships with other people. People have trouble going to work over it. I mean, it can just get completely out of control. So that is the other, way that we have to look at that too. So, well, we went, almost an hour and a half. I think it's like an hour and 20 minutes, but that's wonderful, because I think we got out everything we needed to say. So thank you, Rose, for being here, and for being so transparent. Just
Thank you, Carla, for all that you do for all of us.
Oh, you're
That you,
welcome. You too, because I know you've helped people. Like, you've helped my daughter, and you've helped so many people, and you've helped me with my classes by giving your testimony, and you've helped people today by being here. So our prayer for those people that are listening is that you would recognize that there is hope and there is help, and that you would be recognized. And not only that, there is help and hope to help you forgive by understanding where the person is coming from, why the person did what they did, and recognizing that not forgiving means that you're gripped by the unforgiveness, which can just destroy your own life and causes you even more pain. The other person might not even know how you feel about them. So forgiveness is for you. And my Healing the Wounds of Your Past class goes through losses. and goes through the really, really intricate steps that are involved in forgiveness. So if you're really struggling with that and you're listening, go ahead and check that out on my website, Healing the Wounds of Your Past. So thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. And I just pray that you'll share this episode with people that you know really need it, and that you'll be back to listen to the next one. Thank you. God bless.
God bless.